I watched in disbelief as 3 police cars surrounded my moving truck. The HOA president stood there with a smug smile, pointing at me like I was some common criminal. She had no idea that I'd been secretly recording everything for months, and that those same officers she called to arrest me were about to become my greatest allies in exposing the biggest fraud this mountain community had ever seen. My name is Sarah Chen, and 6 months ago, I thought I was buying my dream retirement cabin in Pine Ridge Valley, Colorado, at 52. After 30 years as a forensic accountant, I'd saved every penny to purchase this beautiful 2-bedroom log home nestled among the aspens. The realtor, Jana Morrison, assured me it was a peaceful community with a friendly homeowners association. That should have been my first red flag. The trouble started the moment I signed the closing papers. Within hours of getting my keys, I received a certified letter from the Pine Ridge HOA demanding I attend an emergency meeting regarding my unauthorized occupancy. Unauthorized? I just bought the place legally, with a clear title and a mortgage from First National Bank. The meeting was held in the community center, a rustic building that felt more like a tribunal than a neighborhood gathering. 12 residents sat in folding chairs arranged in a semicircle, but all eyes were on the woman standing at the front. Margaret Blackwood, the HOA president, was a severe-looking woman in her 70s with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that could freeze water in July. "Miss Chen," she began, her voice dripping with disdain, "there seems to be a problem with your purchase." I clutched my folder of documents tighter. "What kind of problem?" "Everything was handled through proper legal channels." Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid the previous owner, Harold Winters, was not authorized to sell that property. It's been in violation of multiple HOA covenants for over 2 years. The association has the legal right to reclaim it." My heart pounded. "That's impossible. The title search was clean, and the title search didn't include our private covenants," interrupted Richard Stern, the HOA vice president, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like he enjoyed delivering bad news. "Mr. Winters owed over $40,000 in fines and assessments. The cabin legally belongs to the HOA now." I stood up, my forensic training kicking in. "Show me the documentation. Show me the legal authority for these claims." Margaret's face hardened. "You have 30 days to vacate, or we'll take legal action." This meeting is adjourned, but I didn't leave. Instead, I spent the next week diving deep into the HOA's financial records, which were supposed to be available to all homeowners. What I found made my blood run cold. There were discrepancies everywhere. Phantom assessments, inflated repair costs, and payments to companies that didn't seem to exist. As a forensic accountant, I'd seen embezzlement schemes before, but this was brazen. The more I investigated, the more I realized this wasn't just about my cabin. Margaret and her inner circle had been systematically targeting homeowners, creating fake violations and forcing people to sell their properties at below-market prices. Then they'd flip the houses to their friends and family members at huge profits. Harold Winters, my cabin's previous owner, had been their latest victim. When I finally tracked him down at an assisted living facility in Denver, the 83-year-old veteran was heartbroken. They said I owed money for violations I'd never heard of. He told me, tears in his eyes. They claimed my cabin was an eyesore, that I was violating building codes. I couldn't fight them, Sarah. I didn't have the money for lawyers, and my health was failing. So I sold it to you for whatever I could get, hoping at least someone good would end up with my home. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be another victim of Margaret Blackwood's scheme. I was going to fight back, and I was going to expose them all. I started documenting everything. I installed security cameras around my cabin and began recording all interactions with HOA members. I also reached out to other homeowners who'd been targeted, slowly building a network of allies who'd been too scared or intimidated to speak up before. The HOA escalated quickly. They began issuing daily violation notices for absurd infractions. My mailbox was 3 inches too far from the curb. My firewood pile was aesthetically non-compliant. and my car was allegedly commercially sized despite being a standard Honda Civic. Each violation came with hefty fines, and when I refused to pay them, they threatened to place a lien on my property. But their biggest mistake was underestimating me. Every threat, every fake violation, every forged document was adding to my evidence file. 3 weeks after that first meeting, Margaret played her final card. She had grown tired of my resistance and decided to take direct action. As I was unloading groceries from my car, she approached with 2 other HOA board members flanking her like bodyguards. "Miss Chen, this is your final warning," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You have 48 hours to vacate this property voluntarily, or we will have you forcibly removed." I looked her straight in the eye. "On whose authority?" "On the authority of the Pine Ridge HOA and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department." I happen to be very good friends with Sheriff Davidson. My stomach dropped. Having the local sheriff in their pocket explain how they gotten away with this scheme for so long. But I'd come too far to give up now. "Then I guess we'll see what the law really says about this," I replied. 2 days later, I was loading my moving truck, determined to stay in my cabin regardless of their threats, when I heard the sirens. 3 police cars were racing up the mountain road, heading straight for my property. Margaret Blackwood was about to make the biggest mistake of her criminal career. I watched those police cars approach with a mixture of terror and determination coursing through my veins. This was at the moment Margaret Blackwood thought she'd finally won. But as a forensic accountant who'd spent decades uncovering financial crimes, I learned one crucial lesson: the devil is always in the details. And I've been collecting details for weeks. The 3 patrol cars pulled up in front of my cabin, their red and blue lights painting the pine trees in an ominous dance of color. Margaret emerged from her black Suburban, practically glowing with satisfaction. She brought her entire inner circle: Richard Stern, the Weasley vice president, Barbara Henley, the treasurer, and Tom Walsh, the secretary. They stood in formation, like they were about to witness an execution, but something was wrong with their perfect picture. As the officers stepped out of their vehicles, I recognized the lead deputy, Maria Santos, someone I'd gone to high school with 30 years ago. More importantly, I'd been emailing her department for weeks, sharing everything I discovered about the HOA's fraudulent activities. Margaret strutted over to Deputy Santos with supreme confidence. "Officers, thank God you're here. This woman is trespassing on HOA property and refusing to leave despite multiple legal notices." Deputy Santos looked at me, then back at Margaret. "Ma'am, I need to see your documentation proving ownership of this property." "Of course," Margaret practically shrieked, pulling out a thick folder. "Everything is right here. The covenants, the liens, the violation notices." "Mrs. Blackwood," I interrupted, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "before you show them those documents, I think the officers should know that I've been working with the district attorney's office for the past 3 weeks, providing evidence of systematic fraud within this HOA." The color drained from Margaret's face. "What are you talking about? That's absurd." Deputy Santos stepped forward. "Ms. Chen, are you referring to the financial documents you submitted to our fraud investigation unit?" "Yes, exactly those documents." I pulled out my own folder, thick with evidence I'd meticulously compiled. "Deputy Santos, I believe what Mrs. Blackwood is about to show you are forged liens and falsified violation notices. I have the originals here, along with evidence of document tampering." Margaret's hands began to shake. "She's lying. She's a criminal trespasser trying to—" "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down," Deputy Santos said firmly. She turned to me. "Miss Chen, can you walk me through what you've discovered?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for. Over the past month, I've uncovered a systematic embezzlement scheme targeting elderly and vulnerable homeowners in this community. The HOA leadership has been creating fake violations, forging documents, and forcing residents to sell their properties below market value. They then sell these homes to associates at massive profits. I opened my folder and pulled out bank statements, forged signatures, and communication records. Mrs. Blackwood and her associates have stolen over $100,000 from this community over the past 5 years. Richard Stern stepped forward nervously. This is ridiculous. We're the victims here. She's the one breaking the law. Mr. Stern, I said, looking directly at him, would you like me to explain to the officers how you've been billing the HOA for construction work performed by your brother's company, except your brother's company was dissolved 3 years ago? Or should we discuss the $12,000 in emergency roof repairs charged to the community center that never actually happened? The blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. Deputy Santos was taking notes furiously. Miss Chen, you said you have recordings, hours of them. I pulled out my phone and a small recording device. Colorado is a one-party consent state, so everything here is legally admissible. I'd have Margaret admitting to fabricating violations, Richard discussing how to manipulate homeowners into selling, and Barbara bragging about their foolproof system for avoiding detection. Barbara Henley, who had been silent until now, suddenly exploded. You can't use those recordings. That's entrapment. That's illegal. Actually, ma'am, it's not. Deputy Santos replied. Colorado law clearly permits recording conversations when one party consents, which Miss Chen obviously did. She looked back at me. What else do you have? I pulled out the most damning evidence I discovered 2 weeks ago. I found this in the community center's office during a meeting. I held up a manila folder labeled property acquisition targets. It contains a list of 15 properties they plan to force into foreclosure over the next 2 years, along with detailed financial profiles of each homeowner. They specifically target elderly residents, veterans, and single women. Margaret made a desperate play, even if some irregularities occurred. That doesn't change the fact that she's trespassing. The liens against her property are legitimate. About those liens, I said, pulling out another document. I had them analyzed by a handwriting expert. The signatures from Harold Winters, the previous owner, are forged. I also have Harold's sworn affidavit stating he never received any violation notices and never agreed to any assessments. Deputy Santos looked at her fellow officers. Then back in Margaret's group, I think we need to continue this conversation at the station. You can't arrest us, Tom Walsh shouted. We haven't done anything wrong. We're the whole board. We have legal authority, sir. Your legal authority doesn't include fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Deputy Santos replied calmly, ma'am. She said to me, I'll need you to come in as well, but as a witness, not a suspect. As the officers began reading rights to Margaret and her accomplices, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The fight was far from over. Tomorrow, I knew, would bring lawyers, court hearings, and a media circus, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Margaret Blackwood had underestimated the wrong woman, and soon, the entire community would know the truth. 6 weeks later, I sat in Jefferson County District Court, watching Margaret Blackwood's defense attorney make his opening statement. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread throughout Pine Ridge Valley about the HOA scandal, and half the community had shown up to watch their former tormentors face justice. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, said defense attorney Robert Hartwell, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, my clients are not criminals. They are dedicated community volunteers who made some accounting errors while trying to maintain property values in their neighborhood. The prosecution wants you to believe that simple bookkeeping mistakes constitute fraud, but that's simply not the case. I nearly laughed out loud. Simple bookkeeping mistakes. I documented over 200 separate instances of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. But I knew this was just the beginning. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, no relation to Tom Walsh from the HOA, stood to make her opening statement. She was a formidable woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for prosecuting white-collar crimes. Members of the jury, over the next 5 days, we will prove that the defendants operated a criminal enterprise designed to steal homes from vulnerable residents through systematic fraud. This wasn't about community service or property values. This was about greed, pure and simple. She walked over to a large display board covered with financial charts. The defendants stole over $100,000 from their own neighbors. They forged documents, created fake violations, and intimidated elderly residents into selling their homes below market value. Then they sold those same homes to family members and associates at massive profits. The first day of testimony focused on the financial evidence. As the prosecution's key witness, I spent 4 hours on the stand walking the jury through bank statements, forged signatures, and altered documents. Margaret's attorney tried to discredit me, suggesting I had fabricated evidence to avoid paying legitimate HOA fees. Ms. Chen, he said during cross-examination, "Isn't it true that you purchased your cabin knowing there were outstanding violations?" "That's incorrect," I replied firmly. "The title search revealed no liens or violations. Every document showing violations was created after my purchase date, and many contain forged signatures. How can you be certain these signatures are forged?" I pulled out the handwriting analysis report. I hired Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a certified forensic document examiner. She determined with 99.7% certainty that Harold Winter's signatures on the violation notices were forged. Mr. Winters also provided sworn testimony that he never received any of these notices. The second day brought Harold Winters to the stand. At 83, he was frail but determined. His testimony was devastating. "They told me I owed $40,000 in fines," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I lived in that cabin for 22 years, and suddenly I was a criminal in my own home. They said if I didn't pay immediately, they'd take my house anyway, and I'd get nothing. So I sold it to Sarah for whatever I could get, just to avoid complete financial ruin." Margaret's attorney tried to suggest Harold was simply forgetful about receiving violation notices. But Harold produced his own evidence, a detailed journal he kept of every interaction with the HOA. Over 2 decades, there were no entries about violations until the final month before his forced sale. The third day was when Margaret made her fatal mistake. She took the stand in her own defense, and DA Walsh was ready for her. "Mrs. Blackwood, you testified that all violation notices were sent according to proper procedures. Let me show you Exhibit 47. The prosecutor held up a violation notice allegedly sent to Harold Winters. "Can you explain why this notice, dated 6 months ago, is printed on letterhead that your HOA didn't adopt until 3 weeks ago?" Margaret's face went white. That must be a clerical error." "A clerical error? Mrs. Blackwood, we have 17 similar clerical errors in your evidence. Are you suggesting your office traveled through time to print past notices on future letterhead?" But the real bombshell came when DA Walsh played the recordings I'd made. The first one was devastating enough, Margaret discussing how to pressure that old fool Winters into selling before he figures out what we're doing. But the second recording made the entire courtroom gasp. It was Margaret talking to Barbara Henley about targeting me specifically. "The forensic accountant is getting too close." Margaret's voice echoed through the speakers. "We need to escalate fast and get her out of there before she uncovers the Miller property situation." The Miller property situation? I suspected there were more victims, but this was the first direct evidence of additional crimes. Richard Stern's attorney immediately requested a recess, and I watched as the defense team huddled in panic. They hadn't expected me to have recordings of crimes beyond what was in the original charges. When court resumed, DA Walsh called her surprise witness, Detective Raymond Foster from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. "Detective Foster, can you tell the court about the Miller property investigation?" 2 weeks ago, based on information provided by Ms. Chen, we began investigating the 2019 forced sale of the Miller family cabin. Edward Miller was a 78-year-old veteran who died suddenly while fighting HOA violations. His widow was forced to sell their cabin within a month of his death to pay alleged outstanding fines. Margaret's attorney shot to his feet. "Objection. This is beyond the scope of the current charges." Judge Harrison sustained the objection, but the damage was done. The jury had heard enough to understand this wasn't an isolated incident. The final Blow came when Tom Walsh cracked under cross-examination. Mr. Walsh, Mrs. Blackwood testified that you were responsible for sending all violation notices. Can you explain why your computer's metadata shows that 17 violation notices were backdated and created months after their alleged send dates? Tom started sweating profusely. Sometimes we had to recreate notices if the originals were lost. Mr. Walsh, are you testifying under oath that you routinely forged legal documents? That's when Tom broke completely. She made us do it. Margaret said we'd all go to prison if anyone found out what we'd been doing. She said this was the only way to cover our tracks. The courtroom erupted. Margaret's attorney was frantically objecting, but Tom kept talking, revealing detail after detail about that criminal operation. As court adjourned that day, I could see the defeat in Margaret's eyes, but I had no idea that the biggest revelation was still to come. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, I could tell from their solemn faces that justice was about to be served. As the jury reached a verdict, Judge Harrison asked. "We have, Your Honor," replied the foreman, a middle-aged man who'd been taking copious notes throughout the trial. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of embezzlement, how do you find? Guilty." The verdicts continued guilty on all 27 counts. Margaret Blackwood sat frozen as each word fell like a hammer blow. Richard Stern was openly weeping. Barbara Henley stared at the table in shock. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following month. But as the courtroom began to empty, D.A. Walsh approached me with a grave expression. "Sarah, we need to talk." Privately, 20 minutes later, I sat in her office, confused by her serious demeanor. We'd won what could possibly be wrong now. During Tom Walsh's testimony, he mentioned something that caught our attention. She began. He said Margaret told them they'd all go to prison if anyone found out what they'd been doing. But Sarah, the crimes we prosecuted only go back 3 years. Tom's comment suggests this operation has been running much longer. She pulled out a thick file. "We've been investigating, and what we found is staggering. This whole fraud scheme has been operating for over a decade, but Margaret Blackwood isn't the mastermind. She's been taking orders from someone else." My blood ran cold. "Who?" "John M. Morrison." The name hit me like a physical blow. John M. Morrison, my real estate agent. The woman who'd sold me the cabin in the first place, who'd assured me the HOA was friendly, who'd fast-tracked the sale despite obvious red flags. D.A. Walsh continued. "Jana has been the puppet master behind this entire operation. She identifies properties with elderly or vulnerable owners, then instructs Margaret's HOA to target them with fake violations. Once the owners are forced to sell below market value, Jana swoops in as the listing agent, earning commission on both the forced sale and the inflated resale to her associates. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. How long has this been going on? We've identified at least 43 properties over 12 years. Jana has made over $1.2 million in illegal profits. But here's the twist that's going to shock you. She planned for you to be her final victim." I stared at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" D.A. Walsh pulled out a recorded phone call transcript. This is from a wiretap we placed on Margaret's phone after Tom's testimony. It's a conversation between Margaret and Jana from 3 days ago, while Margaret was out on bail. She handed me the transcript, and I read with growing horror. "Jana, you idiotic woman. You were supposed to scare her off, not create a federal case. Margaret, she's not like the others, Jana. She's smart. She's documenting everything, Jana. Of course she's smart. That's why I chose her. I needed someone with forensic accounting skills to discover just enough evidence to expose you and your amateur operation, but not enough to trace it back to me." "Margaret, what are you talking about?" "Jana, Margaret, you've been my stalking horse for 12 years. I've been setting you up as the fall guy from the beginning. When this all came out, you were supposed to take the blame while I walked away clean with millions in profits." The room spun around me. Jana had orchestrated everything, including my purchase of the cabin. She'd known I would investigate, known I would uncover the fraud, and known I would take down Margaret's operation. I was never supposed to be a victim. I was supposed to be her unwitting accomplice in eliminating the evidence trail that led back to her. But she made one critical mistake. DA Walsh continued. She underestimated how thorough your investigation would be. When you started looking into older cases and connecting patterns across multiple properties, you began uncovering evidence of her involvement too. So what happens now? Now we arrest John M. Morrison for racketeering, conspiracy, and fraud. And Sarah, we need your help to do it. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Jana didn't know we discovered her involvement, so we arranged for her to meet me at the cabin under the pretense of discussing media interviews about the successful prosecution. She thought she was coming to celebrate her victory over Margaret. Instead, she walked into a trap. When Jana arrived at my cabin that evening, she was practically glowing with satisfaction. Sarah, you were incredible in court. You've done such a service to this community, exposing those corrupt HOA officials. Have I? I asked, my hand resting on the recording device in my pocket. Or have I just done exactly what you planned all along? Her smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that you've been using me from day one to eliminate Margaret and cover your own tracks. But Jana, you made one mistake. You taught me to be thorough in my investigations. That's when Detective Foster emerged from inside the cabin, along with two other officers. John M. Morrison, you're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and organized criminal activity. As they led her away in handcuffs, Jana looked back at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've destroyed. Yes, I do, I replied. I've destroyed a criminal enterprise that stole homes from vulnerable families, and I couldn't be more proud. 1 year later, Margaret Blackwood was sentenced to 8 years in prison. John M. Morrison received 15 years. The HOA was dissolved, and a victims fund was established to help families recover their losses. For me, I'm still living in my beautiful cabin, which I now own free and clear. But more importantly, I've started a consulting business helping other communities investigate HOA fraud. Because if there's one thing I learned from this experience, it's that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who gain your trust first. But with the right evidence, thorough investigation, and a little courage, even the most sophisticated criminals can be brought to justice. If you suspect HOA fraud in your community, don't stay silent. Document everything, seek legal advice, and remember, no one has the right to steal your home through intimidation and lies. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else.